Aja, तुम कैम there we go. Smile. वो ठीक है set camera on head if you guessed it joke
Oh,
whatever
picture? I don't know, I haven't seen this before.
वो ठीक है मतलब zoom तो नहीं करना is it good okay yeah we had some issues because of all the rain this morning when we got here. But inshallah I guess I'm waiting on a couple of people and we'll kind of get started. Which order will yeah, some of the tiles kind of caved in on us, and I don't know if you can tell but no, y'all can't tell but I'm wet, so वैसे नहीं होगा इसको ऊपर नीचे वैसे करो या तो समझे Okay, so anyway, who all's on? Yusuf, are you on? Nope. Okay. I guess we're waiting on Brother Kelvin, as Kyle said he was going to be late. They changed his schedule at work. But we'll go ahead and get started, inshallah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Lana Muhammadin wa ala salli ala Sayyidina Lana Muhammadin barik sallu alayhi. The topic, I guess, for the next several weeks, inshallah, will be Ahlul Bait. Which is the household of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And what kind of brought this on, one is someone gave me a suggestion that we need to be a little bit more structured, which we were in the beginning and then we kind of dropped off. But most people who've been listening weren't there in the beginning. So for the handful that were here, we had some structure and then we kind of dropped off. We covered certain topics and then we opened up to more questions. We're going to go back to kind of covering this topic specifically at the moment, and it's going to take several weeks to really cover it. And even then we won't do it justice. So, because the topic of Ahlul Bait is very broad. And when we talk about Ahlul Bait, or the household of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that includes Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself, because he himself said, "Nahnu Ahlul Bait," we the Ahlul Bait. So he included himself within Ahlul Bait. You can't say that for the companions. He said this. He included himself in this way as well as in the way when he took them under his cloak. He himself was under that cloak, and we'll get to those topics, as we talk. What I want to cover mostly today is the significance of the topic itself and why also it's so neglected, and those two kind of go together. This also gets back to a question that we had 2 weeks ago about hypocrisy that I didn't cover at that time, or that aspect that I didn't cover at that time. We kind of talked about general things of hypocrisy, but we never talked about the aspect that's connected to Ahlul Bayt, which we'll talk about a little bit, inshallah, today if we have time. So again, kind of the the setup for the next few weeks is going to be for the first hour, we will talk about the topic, which is Ahlul Bayt, and then after that, for the next, the remaining time will be questions, preferably related to the topic, and if something else, indirectly related, and I want to cover this in somewhat of a chronological, I guess, layout. But even doing that, we're going to be jumping back and forth at times, which in ways also helps people remember things, because when we go back to a certain topic, bringing up another aspect of it, then it reminds you, oh yeah, that as well, and so then it's easier to remember things down the road. Because otherwise what happens with most of us is we hear something once and then we never hear it again and we forget about it. So when it comes time to make some connection with it, well, we don't have the background to make that because we can't remember. But if we keep kind of going back and forth and we keep revising things as we're adding things on. And it also makes it easier to remember, because you also kind of, if you remember in school, the teachers would make you do a outline and then the topic, and you never understood what's the significance in this. Why is this so important? Well, part of the importance of that is that's how our minds work, and how we remember is, initially if you have the framework and then you start filling in the gaps, it just makes it easier to remember things down the road. So that's how we're going to approach this, inshallah. When we look at the significance of Ahlul Bayt, we spoke about this a little bit at Eid, and which also brought on some of this, why we're doing this now anyway. Because these are things that unfortunately are not mentioned in a lot of places. And that gets into a different aspect of why they're not mentioned, and we're going to cover that as well. Rasulullah ﷺ, he said, and he said this twice. So he makes this statement in front of all of the companions, not just once, but twice. Once in Hajjatul Wida, so the day that he gave that last sermon, what's known as, the last sermon, is also the day that he makes this statement. And he also makes this statement at Ghadir Khum on the way back to Medina Munawwarah. And the statement is that I'm leaving two very heavy things behind. And if you cling to them, if you adhere to them, if you stick to them, then you will never be led astray. And he said that one is heavier than the other, and that one is the Quran. And the other is Ahlul Bait. This is my household. Itrati Ahlul Baiti, And when Zayd bin Arqam radiallahu anh was asked later on about this, because people try to include many other groups into this Ahlul Bait group. There are different categories of Ahlul Bayt, but when we're talking here, we're talking very specific. So they asked him specifically, does this include the wives of Rasulullah, because are they not members of the household? He says, no, when we're talking about this does not include them. So that also got clarified. But when he mentioned Ahlul Bayt, he said, be careful of your rights towards them. And he said that 3 times. If you're going to emphasize a certain point, either it's because it's more significant than another point, which we know here, Ahlul Bayt is not heavier than the Quran. Because Rasulullah already told us that. Or it's a point that you fear will be neglected later on. Just like on the last sermon, when he emphasized the rights of the women, because he knew that those would be the rights that would be neglected. So here he emphasized the rights of Ahlul Bayt because he knows that these are going to be the rights that are going to be neglected. And again, he didn't just say this once. He said this in 2 different places at 2 different times, which, just like verses of the Quran that were revealed twice, it's an emphasis. that this is something you've got to adhere to. But he also said, at the beginning, he said, if you adhere to these two, then you will never be misguided. Which means if you want guidance, then you have to adhere to both. You can't, take one and neglect the other. If you do that, then you're going to be led astray. And this is what we see in the Ummah today. Which is interesting because in Surah Al Imran, verse 103, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he starts off with the verse, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم واعتصموا بحبل الله جميعا ولا تفرقوا. So 103 of Surah Al Imran, he says, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. That hold fast to the rope of Allah all together, and do not be divided amongst yourselves. Hablillah through what Rasulullah ﷺ taught us is the Quran itself. But that's not all of Hablullah. Of Hablillah. Hablillah is the Quran and Ahlul Bait. And this we know from the explanation of Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salam. So Ja'far Sadiq, since we're talking about Ahlul Bait, Ja'far Sadiq is one of the Imams and one of the scholars of Ahlul Bait. He is the son of Imam Muhammad Baqir, who is the son of Imam Ali bin Hussein, Imam Zain al-Abidin, who is the son of Imam Hussein al-Islam, who is the grandson of Rasulullah ﷺ. He is the son of Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajhahu and Bibi Fatima salamullah alayha, and the grandson of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He is amongst the teachers of Imam Malik, amongst the teachers of Imam Abu Hanifa, amongst the teachers of all of the sciences that we know today, whether it's astronomy, mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology. Those students all came directly or indirectly from him. The knowledge we have today somehow is connected to him one way or the other. Whether it's the religious sciences or what we term or think of as the physical sciences. They're all connected to him. And he, when he was asked about this verse, he says that we, the Ahlul Bait, are Hablullah, are the rope of Allah. So again, this rope is very big. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ordering us to hold on to this rope. And he says, وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, and do not be divided. So if you hold on to the rope, then you won't be divided. If you let go of the rope, if you let go of any aspect of the rope, then yes, you're going to be divided. And we see the condition of the Ummah today. And this is why. The other interesting, and this is also mentioned by Imam Ibn Hajar Makki. Imam Ibn Hajar Makki, who is also, Imam, known as Imam Ibn Hajar Haytham. So he mentions this. He wrote a book called Swaif al-Murqa, which is a book that he wrote to refute the Shia ideology. And it's a very extensive book related to this. And in that book, he mentions 14 verses of the Quran revealed in honor of Ahlul Bayt and Sayyidina Ali, karamallahu wajh. And this is one of those verses that he mentions. Now, the interesting thing there, though, is that when Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahmatullahi was asked, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahmatullahi said that there are 313 verses of the Quran revealed in honor of Ahlul Bayt and Sayyidina Ali, karamallahu wajh. And there are more, and according to Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, there are more, say, hadiths, extolling or telling us or expounding to us the virtues of Ahlul Bayt and the virtues of Sayyidina Ali Karramallahu wajh than anybody else. You know, and in fact, than most people combined. I mean, you know, and so, but Ibn Hajar Makki, he mentions 14 of these verses in that book. And this is one of the verses that he mentions, and he mentions the saying of Imam Ja'far Sadiq. And if you look at, you know, so no one can deny Imam Ja'far Sadiq, you know, whether he claims to be Shia or whether he claims to be Sunni. The Shia, of course, they have to accept him because he's one of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. You know, the Sunnis, even as much as they want to downplay his position, you know, he is one of the narrators of Hadith. Considered one of the siqa narrators of hadith, you know, those who are trustworthy and honest and whose memory was very good, you know, and again, he's the teacher of all of these great scholars that are accepted by those who claim to be Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So, but if you look at this verse, it doesn't just stop there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he says وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, he says وَاذْكُرُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ, and then he goes on, he says, and remember with the favor of or with gratitude Allah's favor on you, that you were enemies and he joined your hearts in love, so that by his grace ye became brethren, and ye were on the brink of the pit of fire, and he saved you from it. Thus that Allah make his signs clear to you, that ye may be guided. So, you know, unfortunately these days, you know, a lot of us, we talk about, oh, you know, if we do what they do, then we'll be united. If we do this, we'll be united. You know, if we do this, see how much further we can. Look at those people, look what they're doing. We can do all of this stuff and we'll be, you know, we'll get ahead in society, and we'll do this and we'll do that, and all of these things will happen, which is all a delusion. You know, the unity and the love of the hearts for each other comes from Allah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the criteria here for him giving it to us. We are not like the other people. You know, the same criteria that applies to them does not apply to us. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that the criteria for us, you know, for us to be united and to love each other and to be saved from the fire, is to hold fast to that rope. And what is that rope? The rope of Allah is the Quran and Ahlul Bait. Now, a lot of people these days, they try to bring up the hadith that, oh, see, Rasulullah said that I'm leaving two heavy things behind, you know, the Quran, and if you hold fast to them, then you won't be misguided, the Quran and my Sunnah. You know, and they totally neglect this hadith. Which is interesting, because if you look at that hadith is daif, it's weak. You know, the narrators are weak, the saying itself is weak. Even though the saying may be correct, depending on how you understand it, but it's weak. Okay. So the people, all these people that are shouting out, oh no, this hadith is daif, we don't accept that hadith because it's daif, are the same people that jump over this Sahih hadith, which is in Sahih Muslim, onto this hadith because of the agenda. You know, because they don't want to talk about Ahlul Bayt. So you see the hypocrisy there, which brings us to the topic of hypocrisy. You know, which we, like I said, we mentioned, and the only reason I'm mentioning this right now is we talked about a little bit about hypocrisy 2 weeks ago. So I'm bringing it up today because, you know, of course, you know, we mentioned the general signs of hypocrisy. You know, when he speaks, he lies. When he makes an oath, he breaks it. You know, his language is abusive. Okay. Trust. Yeah, when he's given a trust, he violates it. But these are kind of generalities. But Rasulullah said to Sayyidina Ali Karramallahu wajh, he said that only a believer will love you, and only a hypocrite will have animosity against you. Okay. And when we look at the statements of the companions, and not just one companion, but multiple companions, who said that, you know, if we wanted to know who was a hypocrite and who was a believer, we would simply take the name of Ali in front of them. And by the expression on their face, we could tell who is who. Yeah. You know, because when you take the name of Ali in front of a believer, his face would light up. You know, because you've mentioned the one he loves. And when you take it in front of a hypocrite, you know, again, he can't say anything, but he's got a, you know, what's inside can't be hidden. You know, and so you see that, you know, that, yeah, it's like, or he tries to make himself indifferent. And this is one of the things that the hypocrites have learned over time. You know, before there was a time when they could directly abuse him, directly criticize him. Okay, you know, if you look at the time of Banu Umayyah, if you look at you know, certain aspects of the times of Banu Abbas, you know, and gets into this history. But if you look at this, then you know, you see where there were groups that directly criticized him, directly abused him, literally cursed him. But then over time, what's happened is, oh, you know, if you did that, you became exposed. Well, you know, we know who you are. Well, what's a hypocrite? Why is a hypocrite a hypocrite? Because he doesn't want to be exposed, right? So now they come out, oh, we pray, you know, they start talking about, oh, his virtues and all of this stuff. But now you can tell them, because when you start talking about Sayyidina Ali Karamallah, or you start talking about Ahlul Bait, then, you know, there's always that, you know, they won't say, oh, what you're saying is wrong, or, you know, that's not true. Then they'll jump out and say, well, what about this companion? And what about that companion? You know, and yet when you talk about the other companions, they never say, what about this one or what about that one? They have no problems with that. But when you start talking about Ahlul Bayt, when you start talking about Sayyidina Ali Karamallah, suddenly it becomes an issue. You know, and it's not a direct issue. Oh no, what you're saying is right, but why are you neglecting these other people? I'm not neglecting them. I'm simply talking about the subject matter right now. Everybody has their place. And you know, and this is you know, the thing with Shaitan. What was his issue? You know, why is he so elevated, and why am I still, you know, why do I have to bow down to him? Why do I have to acknowledge him? Why isn't anybody acknowledging me? So that's the issue. And this is also why this topic is so neglected. Is, you know, because, you know, you know, they're really, by neglecting it, they're really exposing themselves. And we don't talk about that. You know, well, why don't you talk about it? Because there's an issue. And there's also a hadith where Rasulullah said that, you know, that anyone who has animosity toward Ali and Ahlul Bayt, they're not free from one of three conditions. You know, and because this is going to get probably posted, and children might listen to it. Two of them deal with legitimacy, and for those two, you know, those folks can go ask their mother. But the other one is hypocrisy. So, you know, and this is also a statement of some of the companions. They said, you know, if you want to know who was who, if they were legitimate or not, again, the same thing. We'd take the name of Ali in front of them. We'd know. So if somebody has an issue with Ali, he's telling you his lineage, that there's an issue with it. I mean, it's just, you know, and again, these aren't things from the history. These are things from the hadith. So, but again, as I said, you cannot talk about Ahlul Bayt without talking about Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And that's, you know, you can't talk about one in isolation from the other because they're so connected. And again, Ahlul Bayt is Ahlul Bayt because of him. And again, he took them under his cloak. You know, so, and we'll talk about the cloak first, and then we're going to go back, and I said I want to talk about the significance of the topic itself today, inshallah. And this is more than likely going to take a while. And so we'll be talking about this subject matter for several weeks. Rasulullah ﷺ is in the household of Bibi Salma, radiallahu anha, his wife, the mother of the believers, Bibi Salma, radiallahu anha. And Jibreel alayhi salam comes with a verse, which is from Surah Ahzab, so Surah number 33. And the verse itself is also verse number 33. So it's easy to remember, 33, 33. Okay. Now, if I look at the part of the verse that I'm going to emphasize, and the part that's revealed in honor of Ahlul Bait specifically, إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهِ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمُ الرِّجْسَ أَهْلُ الْبَيْتِ وَيُطَهِّرُكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا. And Allah only, he says wishes, but Allah only intends. إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهِ. Yuridullah, the will of Allah or the intention of Allah. It is only the intention of Allah. إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهِ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمُ الرِّجْسَ أَهْلُ الْبَيْتِ. That He remove all abomination from you, Ahlul Bait, the members of the family, the household, and to make you pure and spotless. وَيُطَهِّرُكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا. Complete, perfect cleansing. So, this verse, and there's another verse in Surah Al Imran that we're going to talk about later, which are connected. And so, here, when this verse is revealed, he is in the household of his wife, the mother of the believers, Salma radiallahu anha. He calls for Ali, Fatima, Hassan, and Hussein, alayhimus salam. And when the four of them come, he's sitting there with his cloak, and he takes them in his cloak, under his cloak. And he says, Allahumma ha'ulahi ahli. That Allah, only these are my family. And some people want to say, no, it doesn't mean, well, if you look at the grammar of it, it literally means these, only these are my family. These are my family. This is the one that this is addressed to. His wife, Bibi Salma, radiallahu anha, she also wants to get in there. And looking at this, anybody would want that. And this is her house. She wants to be in there. And Rasulullah says, no, you stay aside. This is not for you. You have been given much good. You are good where you are, but this is not for you. And this gets back to the point that I made earlier. We all have our place, and we need to stick to that place. In the sense that, in a simple example, like a car. If you want to make the transmission work like the engine, well, the car's not going to run, or vice versa. Everything has its place. And in order for the car to run appropriately, everything needs to do what it's supposed to do. Same way with society, and the same way with us in society. Us within Islam. We who are not from Ahlul Bayt, we need to recognize their positions and honor that. We don't need to be like Shaitan, with Adam alayhi salam, to be jealous of, why them and why not me? This is the will of Allah. He gives it to whom He pleases. His pleasure with us is that we be pleased with them. So he takes them under the cloak, and he says that these are my family. Now, the issue that comes up is that if you look at the beginning of the verse, it starts off talking about the wives of Rasulullah. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this. And then, again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again talks about the wives of Rasulullah. Okay. So people say, oh, see, if you look at the context of that part of the verse, it has to be, related to the wives. Which, if Rasulullah had not made any statement about this or had not done anything, then you could say that. But when Rasulullah himself has explained this to us, that this part is specifically for them, then we have no right and no leeway to make that statement. But people make that statement. And there are other examples within the Quran where you can see, like in a conversation, and this is what the Quran is, conversation between Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Subject matters can shift very quickly sometimes, and then shift back. And this is what's happened here. And you see that in other places in the Quran as well. And we'll go over some of those examples later. Like I said, today is more of an introduction. We're going to keep coming back to things. Okay. Imam Tahawi, who passed in around 400 Hijri, very early scholar, accepted. You can't say accepted by all because nothing is accepted by all, but accepted by most. Okay. He says when he talks about this verse, that when the one whose house it was revealed in was not part of this part of the verse, then how can anybody else be part of this verse? Okay. So this is, so that's, him saying this. And this is a scholar that's close to the original, or closer to those who came, who are the Ahlul Salaf, who are the actual, pious predecessors. We see the same thing in Surah Al-Imran. When Rasulullah is ordered to do the mubahila with the Christians from Najran, the preachers from Najran that came, they debated him, they lost the debate, they had no arguments, but they still wouldn't accept. So then he said, okay. Allah subhanahu says, قُلْ إِنْ كَانَ أَبْنَاءَنَا وَأَبْنَاءَكُمْ وَنِسَاءَنَا وَنِسَاءَكُمْ وَأَنفُسُنَا وَأَنفُسُكُمْ. That then tell them that, that we bring our sons, you bring your sons, we bring our women, you bring your women, we bring ourselves, you bring yourselves. And what do? We make dua to Allah that whoever is lying, Allah's curse be upon him. So who did Rasulullah take? As his sons, he took Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein al-Islam. As the women, he took Bibi Fatima salamullah alayha. Because she is going there not just as his daughter, but as the mother of Hassan and Hussein and as the wife of Sayyidina Ali, karamallahu wajh. And as himself, he took Sayyidina Ali, karamallahu wajh. And again, so who did he take? His family, the members of his household, the same ones that were under the cloak. He brought them under the cloak again. So, connecting that verse with this verse, you see the same thing. But again, people want to dispute. But again, they also expose themselves. So, when Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, rahmatullah alayh, he mentions a hadith which he mentions twice. Again, he's emphasizing that to him this is sahih. He mentions it once in Fazail Sahaba. He wrote a book on the virtues of the companions. And he mentions again in Manaqib Amir al-Mu'mineen, in the Manaqib or the virtues of Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajh, whom he wrote a book separately from the virtues of the companions. And in that, And actually, before I get to that, you know, getting back to this concept of hypocrisy, the concept of the people having animosity against Ali. Because again, the issue, oh, well, what about him? What about him? So you have to understand that there's a time when people were and from themselves writing hadith. And there was a individual named Jahid. He actually wrote a book called The Book of Animals, in which is interesting because he mentions evolution in there. The same wording as Darwin 1,000 years before Darwin. The only difference was that Darwin took God out of the equation. Jahid, even though his ideology was messed up, he kept God in the equation. He said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created the system where the animals can adapt to their environment and change and as they need to. So Darwin took that, basically, literally it's almost word for word, part of it, which is interesting. But anyway, so Jahid was from the Mu'tazila group. But money talks, because Mu'tazila, they tried to stay away from the politics of stuff, ideologically, but they never did because money always talks. The interesting thing about Jahid was that, two interesting things. One is that it was said about him that he was as ugly as Yusuf al-Islam was beautiful. Okay. And the physical ugliness doesn't matter. It's the ugliness of the heart that really matters. Okay. But his speech was so eloquent. He was such a master of the language that, it was said that when he would speak, it was as if, hadiths were just dripping off of his tongue. That's how eloquent he was with the language. And so one time, Abdullah, the son of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, rahmatullahi alayhi, he brought a book which expounded the virtues of Banu Umayyah. Okay. And the book is supposed to be hadith of the Prophet ﷺ expounding the virtues of Banu Umayyah. And so when Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, his son brings him the book and he looks at the book and he knows the book. And so he tells his son, he says that these are all lies. These are all fabricated. He said, how do you know? He says that these were all fabricated by Jahid. Banu Umayyah paid him, to fabricate these. Because if you look at Banu Umayyah and Banu Abbas, both of them were really competing with Ahlul Bait and the descendants of Ahlul Bait, and the scholars of Ahlul Bait. Because that's how, they justified their rule and their position and all of the oppression that they were doing. Because they knew that the only ones that really could topple them or could really, bring about change within them or change within society were Ahlul Bait. And they didn't want that because they wanted to control. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Now coming back to this hadith, which according to Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, again, he mentions it in two different places, two different books. And the narration basically says that, Rasulullah ﷺ says that my nur and the nur of Ali were one until 14,000 years before the creation of Adam alayhi salam. When I think of this biologically, you kind of picture a cell, a single cell. And so Rasulullah ﷺ is talking about one nur that then becomes two, but they're still connected. They aren't separated. So just like when a cell divides, that initial meiosis or mitosis, when it happens, you still got an outer rim that's connecting the two of them in certain instances, until eventually they can separate. So Rasulullah says that my nur, and we know that the nur of Rasulullah is the first creation. When Jabir radiallahu asked, about the first creation, what did he say? Which is mentioned in Musannaf Abdul Razak, who is the teacher of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, who is the teacher or amongst the teachers of Imam Bukhari. So Abdul Razak is amongst the teachers of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, so he is amongst the grand teachers of Imam Bukhari. And in his Musannaf, which is a booklet of hadith, he mentions this hadith where Jabir asked, Ya Rasulullah, what is the first creation? And he says, Nur Nabiyaka, the nur of your Prophet. And then from that nur, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created 4 other nur, from which He created the qalam, the lawh, the tablet, the qalam, the pen, the lawh, the tablet, and the kursi, the throne. And then from the 4th, He created other things. Okay? So this is where you get the hadith in Bukhari where Jabir again is asking what was the first creation, and he says the qalam. Rasulullah says the qalam. And people say, oh no, see, the qalam is the first creation. Well, wait a minute. What does the hadith say? What did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala order the qalam to do? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered the pen, because the pen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered the pen to write. The pen asked, what should I write? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told it, write whatever is to happen and whatever has already happened. Yeah. So if there is nothing that already happened, then why would He say that? Which tells us even from this hadith in isolation that there's something before it, before the qalam. This question here, Jabir is asking, the one that's mentioned in Bukhari, the real question that he's asking is, what was the first thing of those things? Your nur is the first, and then from that, these, for the 4 nur, the qalam, the lawh, and the kursi. So what was first among those 3 things? And here Rasulullah is explaining the qalam. So the nur of Rasulullah is before all the rest of creation. But then he says that the nur of Ali is with his nur. And so, again, people have issues with this also, because, people like exposing themselves. If you don't want to expose yourself, stay quiet. And don't change the expression on your face. Yeah? We also know about the nur of Rasulullah from the verse in the Quran. And I said, I'm going to be going back and forth. And this is a verse that we've talked about before. Inshallah, we'll talk about again. And it's a verse that we keep going back in and out of. Verse 81 of Surah Al Imran, which is the covenant that was taken, that Allah took from the prophets. And it starts off with وَإِذْ أَخَذَ اللَّهُ مِيثَاقَ النَّبِيِّينَ. وَإِذْ, and remember. Allah is reminding His beloved Prophet Muhammad about this event. Who do you remind? You remind the one who was a witness to the event. I can't tell you, okay, you remember when we shot that deer? Well, you weren't there. I can only say that to the one who was there when we shot the deer, right? So he says, وَإِذَا أَخَذَ اللَّهُ مِيثَاقَ النَّبِيِّينَ لَمَا آتَيْتُكُم مِّن كِتَابٍ وَحِكْمَةٍ ثُمَّ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ مُصَدِّقٌ لِّمَا مَعَكُمْ لَتُؤْمِنُنَّ بِهِ وَلَا تَنصُرُنَّهُ قال أأقررتم وأخذتم على ذلكم إسري قالوا أقررنا قال فاشهدوا وأنا معكم من الشاهدين. Of course, here he translates وَإِذْ as behold, but it's and remember, O my beloved, Allah took the covenant of the prophets, saying, I give you a book and wisdom. Then comes to you, and it says here a messenger, but it's Rasulun, which really literally means the exalted messenger. Okay. Exalted messenger, confirming what is with you. Do you believe in him and render him help? Allah said, do you agree and take my covenant as binding on you? They said, we agree. He said, then bear witness, I am with you among the witnesses. Okay? So this is before they've even been sent to the earth, all of these prophets. This is literally as they're being given prophethood. This is part of the agreement. Like you're given a position and you got to sign on the dotted line that, okay, I agree to do all of these things. Until you've signed, that position isn't permanent, right? It says, you haven't agreed. So this is the agreement for them to become prophets. That, I give you the book and wisdom, which means what? I'm giving you prophethood. And then comes this exalted messenger. Do you agree to believe in him and render him help? And they all said, yes, we agree. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, okay, be witnesses amongst yourselves. And I am also a witness over you. I'm also one of the witnesses here. Okay. So again, this is before anybody's come to the earth, because this includes Adam alayhi salam, and Ibrahim alayhi salam, and Nuh alayhi salam, and Musa and Isa and Ibrahim, Ismail, Ishaq, all of them, alayhimus salam. But the other interesting thing is here that they're being made Nabi, being given prophethood. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is already being introduced to them as Rasul. Yeah. And not just any Rasul, but Rasulun, this exalted messenger. Yeah. And if you look at the narration that Imam Qastalani mentions, in that narration, he talks about this verse of the Quran. And he says that when this covenant was being taken, as this covenant was being taken, all of these prophets looked up and they saw this nur, and they said, Liman hadha nur. They asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is this nur? This appears, this looks like your greatest sign, your greatest, your greatest creation. And he said, yes, this is the one about whom this covenant is being taken. So again, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has included himself within Ahlul Bait, or rather has included Ahlul Bait within himself. When he says, Nahnu Ahlul Bait, we the Ahlul Bait. And again, we're talking about this. So this nur of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who is with that nur? The nur of Sayyidina Ali, karramallahu wajh. And so eventually, skipping over a lot of things, this nur is placed within Adam alayhi salam to be sent down through the generations. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about that in the Quran as well. In Surah Shu'ara, which is Surah number 26. And And in that surah, verses 2:19 or 2:18 and 2:19. الذين يراك حين تقوم وتقلبك في الساجدين. 2:18. We see you standing forth in prayer, and we saw your movements in the sajideen, in your ancestors. Jalaluddin Suyuti uses this verse as one of the proofs that the parents of Rasulullah ﷺ and all of the forefathers of Rasulullah ﷺ were Muslim. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions them as sajideen, those who prostrate. Of course, when you go to the translation, they translate a little differently. But Jalaluddin Suyuti, he uses this verse and he translates the verse, that the sajideen are the ancestors of Rasulullah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about his movement through them, in them.
Generations?
Yeah, through the generations. And Rasulullah himself, in Sahih Hadith, he talks about that, that I was transferred from a pure loin to a pure womb until I came to the womb of my mother. He's not going to refer to a mushrik as pure. He also talks about in another narration that he says that none of my ancestors were affected by the effects of jahiliyyah, by the effects of ignorance. And they were all the effects of pure unions. So a lot of people will say, oh, no, this is just talking about marriage, that none of them, committed adultery, but they might have committed shirk, astaghfirullah. He says they weren't affected by jahiliyyah. What's the worst thing of jahiliyyah? It was the shirk. It was the worship of the idols. So we get to now, as I mentioned, the nur of Rasulullah being placed in Adam al-Islam and then being sent down through the generations. But along with that nur is the nur of Sayyidina Ali, Karamallahu wajh, which is also being passed down through the generations with the nur of Rasulullah because their lineage is the same. So these nurs, which are bound together until they eventually come to the loin of the grandfather of Rasulullah, Hazrat Abdul Muttalib. And this is when you get the split. The nur of Nabuwah comes into the loin of Hazrat Abdullah, the father of Rasulullah radiallahu anhu. And the nur of Wilaya comes into the loin of Hazrat Abu Talib radiallahu anhu, the father of Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajh. What was this nur doing? Or rather, what were these nurs doing all of this time? The world has always needed light, enlightenment. And that enlightenment has always been there. The level to which it was expounded and shown with the coming of Rasulullah is something totally different. But the enlightenment has always been there for mankind and for the world. So what were these nurs doing? The nur of Nabuwah was teaching the prophets how to be prophets. And the nur of Wilaya, of the friendship of Allah, was making those who I won't say deserved, because none of us deserve, but those who were chosen for this to be given wilaya. There is no wali without Ali. whether in this ummah or in the previous ummahs. And this isn't, just me saying this. This isn't something that this is even many of their scholars accepting this. Because again, if they don't accept it, it exposes them. So they have to accept it. They always have some excuse for it, but they have to accept it. That there is no wali without Ali. Not even in the previous nations. I'm going to stop here as far as content matter for the moment, inshallah. We will kind of pick up, and again, this is an important topic to understand and to know. There is no iman without it. Even Ibn Taymiyyah, who emphasizes the hadith of Quran and Sunnah, and does not emphasize the hadith of the Quran and Ahlul Bait, even he says that loving Ahlul Bait is fard, it's an obligation. Your iman is not complete without it. And he says that loving the Sahaba is the sunnah of Rasulullah. But even he says that loving Ahlul Bait is an obligation, that is fard. Okay? So, it's like, when your enemies are making statements that support your cause, that's more significant than those who are supposed to be on your side anyway. But as I said, I'm going to be going back and forth on a lot of things. Some things because I forget, while I'm talking about it, my mind goes in a different direction. And some things because I feel like, okay, we'll kind of lay the outline, and then we can jump and then come back and fill in some of the gaps, and it just makes it easier to understand as well as to remember. Okay. So any questions on this?
Where's Brother Kelvin?
Yes. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
So, why Banu Abbas had problems with Ahlul Bait? I thought Banu Abbas was the family of the Prophet as well.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question.
Who is it? Seth?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Who is?
Yes.
What's your name? Right quick.
It's Muhammad. Muhammad Farah.
Ah, mashallah. Yeah, I couldn't understand. We got confused there. You threw me off. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So Banu Umayyah is pretty clear why they had problems, right? So Banu Abbas, if you look at who they are and where they come from, Banu Abbas are the descendants of Abdullah ibn Abbas. That's why they're known as Banu Abbas. So the descendants of the uncle of Rasulullah Abbas radiallahu anhu. Okay. So the reason they had issues with Ahlul Bayt, and here when we're talking Ahlul Bayt, we're talking about the descendants of Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein alayhi salam. So 132 Hijri is when Banu Abbas overthrew Banu Umayyah. So that's when Banu Abbas took over. The reason that they had issues was that, or one of the issues, power corrupts, and kings come up with things that support their own power. And if you look at the history of Islam, it's no different from that standpoint. The issues that come up is how they manipulated some of the understandings of the people. But the reason, and coming back, I'm kind of jumping here, but the reason that Banu Abbas would happen, and the main reason was that before Banu Umayyah was overthrown, the reason that people were fighting, one of the main reasons that people were fighting against Banu Umayyah was because of their attitude toward Ahlul Bayt and the atrocities against Ahlul Bayt. And of course, in those atrocities, they were also committing atrocities against the people. So Ahlul Bayt were the ones who were the most vehemently opposed to them, the ones who physically opposed them, and the ones that the people would rally around to fight against them. And we see this with Imam Zayd. So Imam Zayd bin Ali is the son of Imam Zayn al-Abidin, who gathered an army to fight against Hisham bin Abdul Malik, who was the king at that time. This was 122 Hijri. Unfortunately, most of it, as the story of Ahlul Bayt, the people that claimed to support him and defend him were the people that abandoned him. And eventually he was left with 313 men, all of whom were martyrs. So that's 122 Hijri. After this, you have from the lineage of Imam Hassan alayhi salam. Imam Hassan alayhi salam's one of his sons is Imam Hassan Muthanna, whose son is Imam Abdullah Mad, whose son is Imam Muhammad Nafs Zakiya. Imam Muhammad Nafs Zakiya is the murshid, the one whom Imam Malik rahmatullahi gave bay'ah to. So again, because he's Ahlul Bayt, most people don't mention him. But what happened before this is that at the graveside of the mother of Rasulullah in Abwa, at the graveside of Bibi Amina, they had a meeting before Banu Umayyah is overthrown, and they're making these plans. All of these initial leaders of Banu Abbas gave allegiance to Imam Muhammad Nafs Zakiya. And the allegiance was that when Banu Umayyah is overthrown, then he is the one that will become the ruler. Power will be handed off to him, to Imam Muhammad Nafs Zakiya. However, when Banu Umayyah is overthrown, they said, "Who are you? Power is ours. Power is ours." And so they literally put a price on his head. And he went into exile. And eventually started gathering people around him. People started rallying around him because Banu Abbas were now doing the same thing Banu Umayyah was doing. Yeah. Yes. And so yes. So this is why they had to downplay the status of Ahlul Bayt. This is also why, if you read the books of Hadith, whether from Bukhari onward, you never see anyone write Sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sallam. They always write Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, because this was a mandate from Banu Abbas. If you look at the timelines as to when these hadiths were being written and compiled, it was during the time of Banu Abbas. If you look at Imam Bukhari, Imam Muslim, all of these. So the mandate from the government was you could not write that because it reminded people of Ahlul Bayt.
Who's really supposed to be in charge?
Yes. And so this is why Banu Abbas, and that's a short answer to that. There are other things that connect with that, which I'm going to talk about later on, inshallah. But this is just kind of a short answer to your extended question, because it is an extensive question. There are other aspects to this that are important to understand as well, inshallah.
And then with Kenya, right?
Okay, good. Yeah, power. Power. Always power. Power and money. Yep. Yeah.
I mean, you could die if you wrote that. Right?
Yeah. And that's also why, if there were scholars that were killed for writing that, and there were scholars who, other scholars said, no, we'll go with the mandate simply so that the knowledge will be passed on.
Rather than losing everything.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So any other questions? And now, basically, related to what we spoke about or not related to what we spoke about.
I have a question.
Yes. Assalamu alaikum.
So I was reading that Imam Jafar Sadiq was attributed like the promotion of the idea
Wait a minute, you're cutting out there. I can barely hear you.
Oh. Can you hear me better now?
Yes, yes.
So I was reading Imam Jafar Sadiq was like attributed with like some of the first instances of I don't know if I'm saying it right. Taqiyya?
Oh, taqiyya. Ah, yeah. Okay. Okay. So
Taqiyya,
yeah. So yeah, taqiyya.
Wait, say-
Yeah.
repeat
Let
the
me
question.
explain. Yeah.
Repeat
The
it.
question is that people associate or they claim that, and those people that do taqiyya, and I'll explain taqiyya in a second, claim that Imam Jafar Sadiq is the one who did this and showed
One of the
started
first,
doing.
one of
Yeah,
the
he's
first.
the one of the first. Taqiyya is basically, I mean, in essence, taqiyya is lying. Okay. So they attribute this to him, and this is where you get the concept from the ideology of the Shia, that they say, oh, this it's okay to lie to non-Muslims or to non-believers, and of course anyone who doesn't believe like them is considered a non-believer. Just like certain other religions, certain things are lawful for them against those who don't believe. And so the reason, the thing is that Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam was he would give answers depending on the person asking, because he knew the intention behind the question. But he would give answers in such a way that you couldn't, certain answers, not all answers, but certain answers you couldn't hold him to. And it wasn't, because he was lying, because if you understood the background to what he was saying, you'd realize, okay, yeah, this is what he meant. Okay? But those people were too ignorant to understand the background to what he's saying. So again, it's sort of like when in the Bible, when Jesus, peace be upon him, says, "Give unto Caesar Caesar." And the way the modern day Christians have interpreted it is, pay your taxes, which is not what he's saying. Because the coins there were not lawful for the Jews, because they had the imprint of Caesar on it. So he said, give Caesar to Caesar. There was no Caesar at the time. So the people who knew what he was saying understood, but those who didn't, well, tough luck. So Imam Jafar Sadiq, he answered some of these rulers in such a way, and it didn't, again, he's dealing with politicians and these rulers, so he'd answered them in such a way that they couldn't cut his throat, because they would, and that's what they wanted to do. They eventually poisoned him in 148 Hijri. And yet those who knew him understood exactly what he was saying. So they take this action of his and say, oh, see, this is taqiyya, which is not. Yeah. So that's where that comes from.
So that concept, I thought it was more of a defensive thing, to like deny certain aspects of your practice or your faith for protection, not necessarily like something adversarial or to like press your advantage to non-believers.
No, the way they use it now is, yeah, the way they use it now is adversarial. And it's not.
But initially, that's not what it was.
No. And even the way Imam Jafar Sadiq answered the questions, it's not adversarial. He's answering certain questions in a certain way so that there's not any, or there's minimal backlash against his followers.
He was quietist, right? Like he wasn't like a politically active person, nor did he want to be involved in it.
Well, he
He
wasn't.
didn't want his words like weaponized.
Yeah, he wasn't, but he was at the same time, because through his teachings, he gave the people the tools that they needed. Unfortunately, people take his teachings out of context, and I think, I guess in the last few minutes here, I kind of cover this a little bit. If I look at the household, so as we were talking about during the time of Banu Umayyah, Imam Zayd, who is the son of Imam Zain al-Abidin, who is the son of Imam Hussein al-Islam. You know, he is the first murshid, the first one that Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah gave bay'ah to. Okay. And not only gave him bay'ah, he gave him 30,000 dirham to prepare his army against Banu Umayyah. And this is a time when 3 dirham would buy you a cow. So if I look at 30,000 dirham, that translates to $10 million today if you think of a cow as $1,000. So so Imam Abu Hanifa gives him this money to prepare this army to fight against Banu Umayyah. He gets the army together, 8,000 men. The army of Banu Umayyah, which Hisham bin Abdul Malik is the king, is 20,000 men. When they leave Kufa, his men, the leaders amongst his army, come to him and they say, look, we're willing to give our lives and our wealth for you, so long as you curse Abu Bakr and Umar, radiallahu anhu. So his response to them is that, how can I say anything against those whom I have not heard anything but good from my forefathers? Because if he said that, how can I say anything bad about those who I've not heard any, who have nothing but about whom I have nothing good to say about, they would have said, oh, you've left the way of your forefathers. That's why he emphasizes what his forefathers did, because these are the people who are claiming to be following the forefathers. Okay, so he emphasized that point. So they left him. They abandoned him, leaving him with 313 men. And so they're martyred, and I'm not going to go into the details of all of that at this moment. Okay. So now, because people also use the hadith, or not the hadith, but the ruling of Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah to say, where he said that you cannot, you can't fight against the ruler. He didn't say that in isolation. He's talking about fighting against the ruler without critical mass. It's not like, oh, 2 people are going to go fight against the ruler because he's doing atrocities. You can't do. This is what Imam Abu Hanifa is saying. You can't do that. Once you get critical mass, then you can challenge the ruler if he is an oppressor. So people take that out of context as well. They say, oh, see, Imam Abu Hanifa said don't fight against. No, that's not what he said. Because he's the one who's supporting Imam Zaid. And about Imam Zaid, he said that I did not know anyone who was more knowledgeable and more on the Sunnah of Rasulullah than Imam Zaid. Which, interesting, are the same words as Imam Ja'far Sadiq. Because Imam Ja'far Sadiq, and this is mentioned in the books of Rijal. The books of Rijal are the books that basically you have the history of these people that are narrators of the hadith. Who they were, what was their education, how good was their memory, were they trustworthy, did they ever lie, all of these things are mentioned in there. So and who said what about them. So Imam Ja'far Sadiq is specifically asked about Imam Zaid. And when he's asked about Imam Zaid, because they said, oh, Imam Zaid, he caused this uprising, he did this, he fought against the ruler, So Imam Ja'far Sadiq said, again, the same thing that Imam Abu Hanifa said. He said that there is no one amongst Ahlul Bait who was more knowledgeable or more on the Sunnah of Rasulullah than Imam Zaid. So yeah, people say that Imam Ja'far Sadiq was apolitical, but you have to understand what he was doing and how he was doing it. Imam Ja'far Sadiq is in Medina Munawwara at a time when you have that transition from Banu Umayyah to Banu Abbas. Why did Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajhu leave Medina Munawwara? Because he wanted to get the turmoil out of the city of the Prophet ﷺ. That's why he left and made Kufa the capital. Imam Ja'far Sadiq knows that if he brings up issues, Medina is going to be punished for it. So he's very careful in how he does things. He also has this school where he's teaching all of these things, plus he's teaching the sciences, chemistry, physics, mathematics, astronomy, anatomy, biology. He's teaching all of these sciences because all of these sciences are within Islam. In fact, the true modern day father of chemistry is one of his direct students. Jabir ibn Hayyan, known to the Europeans as Gerber. Yeah, this is where you get gibberish from. Because and Jabir ibn Hayyan, when he would write about any, like, he wrote on osmosis, on evaporation, on all of these chemical principles, he would say that my teacher Imam Jafar Sadiq taught me like this. And the reason that you get the word gibberish is because when the Europeans started reading it during because the Enlightenment didn't come until they started reading Arabic scripture or Arabic writings, the scripture as well, the Quran, but they also read the writings on the various things. So when they started reading his writings on chemistry, it was so far over their heads they couldn't understand it. So, typical fashion, when you can't understand something, it must not mean anything. It's just gibberish. Typical arrogant fashion, that's what they said. Oh, this is where the word comes from. Yet all of these writings and all of these things are coming from him through Imam Jafar Sadiq. So Imam Jafar Sadiq understood, just like when Imam Abu Hanifa wanted to join the army of Imam Zayd told him, no, you can't join my army. You need to go back and continue the process of teaching and learning to make sure that the message comes through and gets across to the later generations. This is what Imam Jafar Sadiq is doing. Not because, being involved in that is a sin or something against what he thought. But he knows the situation and he knows how to handle the situation. We're going to end here today, inshallah. We'll continue with Ahlul Bait again next week and for the next several weeks. Inshallah, again, this is a topic that there is no iman without the love of Ahlul Bait. And so we need to know them and we need to love them so that we can complete our iman. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to do that, inshallah. So I'll end here today. Allahumma salli ala sayyidina wa ala Muhammadin wa ala ali sayyidina lana Muhammadin barik sallallahu alayhi. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum.